So the first thing that I did with this project was prepare the patchwork. This is the image that I took from Pinterest with the instructions on how to make this particular chevron patchwork. What I did was I marked a pair of stretch denim jeans that I had in my closet with tailor's chalk. I marked lines about 2.5 inches apart. Now for this particular project, what you need is several strips of fabric that measure 2.5 inches by 7 inches. I will say this, you want to make sure that whatever fabric you're using, that the weight is the same. And if you're using a stretch denim for your main jean, your strips of fabric should be a stretch denim as well. And then I took it to the machine and I basically followed the instructions on that image that I showed you. And I sewed them all at 1/2 inch apart. And I will say this, in the future, if I were to do this again, I would have preferred to serge each and every one of those seams before sewing them together. I used a total of about 84 strips of fabric in order to create the panels for both sides. And this is what it looks like before I patterned it for the panels. Now, these are the jeans that I used. After I made my patchwork, I opened out the side seams of these stretch denim flare jeans that I had, and including some of the waistband. So I probably unpicked about 6 inches total of the waistband. I chose to unpick the side seams instead of cutting because I wanted to use the seam allowance to sew in the panels. Now here what I'm doing is I created a pattern from another pair of flare jeans that I had, and I essentially cut from the waistband all the way down to the flare. So at the waist, I probably cut about 3 inches, and then at the flare at the bottom, I cut about 6 inches, and I included the center side seam from that other pair of pants. What I'm doing here now is I'm lining up that pattern piece, making sure that that center line on that pattern piece is lining up with the V's, the points of the V's on the chevron, because I want to make sure that on that side panel, what you see are the V's going down the side panel of my jeans. And I pinned them down. I just took my time, making sure that everything was lining up really good, because basically once you cut, right? So I just wanted to be extra careful. I will say this, the strips of fabric, I needed them to be wide to make sure we had enough fabric at the flare, but I did have quite a bit of fabric left over from the patchwork that I created, but that's okay. So here I am, I'm cutting it, and see what I'm saying? So all of that that I'm not using for this particular project is still usable for a future project. So I just put it aside and put it in my stash for another project. And I just went with this particular one too. I did use a couple of different colored denims, and I just kind of intuitively just started working and putting things together. So this is what it looks like once I cut out the actual pattern piece for the panel. Looks so pretty, right? I love it. I just love how clean it looks. And that's the hem, that's the bottom. And I'm getting ready to now show you how to clean off the top. So the first strip is actually not a strip. For this particular chevron patchwork, it's actually a square that's 2.5 by 2.5. And so I cut off that peak because at the top you need it to be flat, and that's what's going to be the top part that goes into your waistband. So here's the jeans. We're getting ready to attach the side panel to the jeans. You want to line everything up really nice, starting at the waistband, taking your time. And I use quilter's clips just because this fabric got a little bulky, and pins would work. If you have pins, it's fine. But I just found that it's a little bit easier to use quilter's clips. And by the way, I found these on Amazon, a whole, I think 100 for like $10. And then I took it to the sewing machine and I sewed the panels together to the pants at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, making sure that I kept all of my seam allowances flat because I didn't want any bulk. So you do want to make sure that you keep your seam allowances as flat as possible. And then I will also say that I wish I would have serged all of the strips of fabric first before I sewed them to make the chevron patchwork. Once I sewed the panel pieces into the jeans, I wanted to finish the seams so that they wouldn't unravel. So I took it to my serger, and I took my time because at this point the fabric was a little thick and my serger could handle it, but I didn't want to stress my machine out. So I just took my time making sure that the seam allowances were flat. So now that I have the panels in, I'm going to go ahead and reattach the waistband. I cut a waistband from another pair of jeans because I did need some room in my waist as well. And I opened them both out, leaving the top seam in place, and I lined them up. And the reason you want to do that is because the waistband is kind of thick. And so I opened it out just like you see here, and I lined them up, making sure that those seam allowances along the top of the waistband match. And so a little trick that I use in order to keep them in place when I'm sewing is I line them up and I opened out the seam allowances like I said, and then I take an extra long pin. It doesn't have to be extra long, but it does make it easier. And I put it in through the seam, and I make sure that on the right side it comes out of that seam allowance. And then I line it up with the other waistband along that seam, and I put the needle in there, the pin in there. And once it goes through the other side, I come back up. That's why it's really nice to have an extra long pin. And I come back up through both layers and keep it in place. And so what that does is when I take to the machine, it'll keep things nice and in place. So you can see they're aligned. And then I'm going to go ahead, and you can see I'm just putting pins in the rest of the waistband. And then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew the waistbands together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So this is what it looks like. And here we are at the sewing machine, and you see I'm very carefully going over the area where the seam allowance is, and I leave the pin in place, just being really careful that my sewing machine needle does not hit the pin. And so this is what it looks like. On the inside, my seams are nice and flat because you don't want a lot of bulk. And then when you open it out, you can see that the waistbands line up really nice. And so once you're done with that, you're going to go ahead and you're going to attach the waistband to your jeans. And I made sure that right sides were facing. And I used clips this time just to hold the fabric together. And when you take it to the sewing machine to sew, you're going to go ahead and you're going to sew it using the existing stitch line like I'm showing here in the video. And I'm just really carefully using that stitch line as my guide, and just taking my time removing the clips as I go. So once they're attached, you're going to go ahead and close up the waistband, and you're going to fold under the raw edge on the wrong side of the denim. And go ahead, and what I did was I took a pin and I went through the seam in the front, making sure that the pin was coming through on the wrong side and that the fabric remained folded under, that the waistband fabric remained folded under. And then you're going to use the previous stitching line, and you're going to line it up on your sewing machine, and you're going to edge stitch using the previous stitching line as your guide, as I'm doing here. And I just took my time with this one, guys. I left the pins in where I could, being really careful, just so that I could keep the waistband on the inside in place, making sure that the stitches caught the inside of the waistband as well as the outside. So this is what it looks like. I used white thread just to keep it kind of subtle, but you could use denim thread if you wanted to. And that's what it looks like on the inside and the outside. I probably could have gotten a little bit better, but it's neat. And then for the final thing, what I did was I wanted to maintain the raw edge that my original jeans that have. And so all I did was I just stitched 1/4 inch along the hem of the patchwork panel. just to make sure that the jeans didn't fray more than I wanted them to. And then I pulled out my seam rippers and I carefully just started unpicking the hem of the panel. I didn't do too much just because I know once I wash them, they'll fray with time. But I just wanted to like get it going and matching it up as best as I could. Doesn't have to be perfect. And this is what the final look looks like. If you like this tutorial, please like and share. If you want more upcycling inspiration and sewing tutorials, please subscribe to my channel. You can see the full look of these pants styled on my Instagram page at Reworked by Iris.